This is a brief project update on the Porsche 944. I've recently hit a bit of a setback in the restoration process because the 944 had a small incident with a deer in the roadway. I had taken the car out to gas it up and circulate the fluids since it hadn't been run in a few weeks. And unfortunately, we live near a deer crossing zone where we've had a few encounters over the years, but no real damage to any vehicles. I was about 4 minutes from home when a deer decided to prance into the street, and in my emphatic attempt to avoid hitting it, I ended up putting the car into a shallow ditch on the shoulder, and it was just deep enough to catch the front spoiler and underside of the car. I heard a crunch as it came to a stop, so I got out to assess the damage and saw there was some coolant leaking from the right side, so I quickly drove it back home, put it on ramps, and I was initially thinking maybe a cracked radiator, but I soon found out that the support bracket was bent and pushed backward into the power steering pump and the lower engine, where the coolant hose was crushed, so that water line was leaking, and the V-belt had then cut a hole through the cooling fan motor electrical connector and its wiring harness. And worse yet, the weld on the upper bracket had broken away from the frame, so it'll need some metal work as well. The AC condenser was also crushed by the bent bracket, the right fog light assembly shattered, and as you can see, it's just in pretty sad shape overall. I was thinking of repairing most of it myself, so I tallied up all the parts costs, and in going with pre-owned parts, I'd be looking at about $1,000, mainly because there aren't many nice front valances or AC condensers available. Those run about $300 a piece, $100 for a radiator, $75 for a fog light, and so on. If I go with new parts from Porsche, the total cost would be closer to $4,000. The OEM valances go for $1,200, $700 for an AC condenser, $800 for a radiator. The cooling fan motors run about $500 a piece, $180 for a fog light, etc. So with all that considered, I'll probably file an insurance claim and get some new parts for the betterment of the car, but it is all repairable and it will get fixed one way or another. And the great thing about these cars is that even though they're 30 going on 40 years old, all these parts are still readily available. While I was looking things over, I also noticed that the front valance isn't original to the car. The prior owner had told me that he had repainted it in preparation for the sale, but it looks like he also swapped it out from a burgundy colored car, as there's now some old paint showing through. But anyway, for the time being, the deer lives on to annoy some other drivers while the 944 sits disabled in the garage. Alright, so it's been a few weeks and I've had the opportunity to look over the car a number of times, as well as speak with a couple local body shops to get some recommendations on the best approach to correct the structural damage. After further inspection, I'll need to add the upper and lower plastic air ducts to the replacement parts list. The wheel housing liners also connect to the lower valance, so the right side cracked as a result of the impact, and there's a small reinforcement plate here that got tweaked, so I'll be replacing those as well. The rest includes various hardware and bushings that will be refreshed along the way, but nothing terribly difficult to track down. I've had a number of exchanges with the insurance company, and we've aligned on a value that will allow me to restore the car to a better state than it was before by using new parts where it makes sense, like the radiator and the AC condenser. There's also an opportunity to get creative with some of the parts and end up with a surplus that can be reinvested into other areas of the car. For example, this lower support bracket is a $240 part, but used ones are available for around $40, and since it's going to be repainted in the factory color anyway, all that matters is that it's straight. What I'd like to have done is some paint correction on the doors and side panels. There's some paint flanking off around the edges of the protective side moldings from the previous respray, and given the opportunity, I'd like to do a side molding delete altogether and repaint the side panels at a minimum, just to clean up the look a bit, but we'll see where we end up and what can be done. For things like the right wheel housing liner and the fog light, I'll need to decide if I want to get two new ones for the right and the left, or just one used one for the right because it'll look a little goofy if the sides don't match. So over the coming weeks, I'll be tearing everything down on the front end so the car can go in for some paint and metal work. I'll begin sourcing all the necessary parts and then rebuilding it all to get the car back on the road.